Alright, here's a super quick review of the Age of Absolutism and the Age of Reason, aka the Enlightenment. Not everything will be said here, but some highlights. So, Age of Absolutism. You're looking at kings and queens who developed all power. Some by using divine right, others with their own made-up sense of power. Now, how did they develop into these strong absolute monarchs with centralized power? There was several factors that occurred here. You have a decrease in the Catholic Church. So as the Catholic Church decreased in power, you saw these monarchs increasing in power. And that also was with the help of the scientific revolution. You see the printing press that allowed for written texts such as Martin Luther's 95 Theses to be printed and expose the Catholic Church. There was also the Age of Exploration, where kings and queens gained newfound wealth and procured it for their own interests, much like Louis XIV did, Philip II, and many, many others. Now, the big question is, were these absolute monarchs effective rulers or ineffective rulers? And this is a really great argument to have. Some would say, hey, less crime because of the harsh punishments. So there's a lot of different angles and perspectives you could take with that. So some absolute monarchs used their power to support the arts. They were patrons, while others, they used all of their wealth to make sure their country was all Catholic, like Philip II did with the Inquisition. Now, as we go through this, you're going to see that some monarchs were absolute, some were limited, and some were enlightened despots, or both. So absolute monarchs had free reign to do whatever they want because their power, they weren't checked. England was the anomaly. They were checked either by a constitution or a group of people called Parliament. Now, the Tudors, which you see here, Henry VIII, Bloody Mary, and the Virgin Queen Elizabeth I, these three, the Tudor family, they worked with Parliament, but they were so charismatic and persuasive that they kind of persuaded Parliament to do what they wanted anyway, so they really didn't need to technically work with Parliament. But after this dynasty fell because Bloody Mary and Elizabeth didn't have children, the Stuarts came in, and some of those guys got their heads chopped off for not working with Parliament. So, and that was called the Glorious Revolution, which is in your textbooks. I don't think we're going to spend too much time on it. So know that the Glorious Revolution in England was a really big move on England's part to reduce the amount of absolute monarchs that they had. Now, the rest of Europe, they're going to be looking at absolute monarchs centralizing their power in a very strict way. Philip II, Ferdinand and Isabella, Charles V, these guys, they were involved in the Inquisition, ruling a country that had Jews and Muslims present, and if you were a Jew or a Muslim, you were either A, running for your life and getting the heck out of there, or you were being subjected to torture, forced conversion, or even death. And this was all just to try to strengthen Catholicism and make a united Spain, but really what it did was it wreaked havoc on the economic lifestyle of Spain, and it also ruined the diversity that was actually great for Spain. Because of their diversity, they came up with new ideas. They had gone through a golden age with Philip II in the beginning part. So, and a lot of the Jews and the Muslims were the people who were educated, and now you're making them flee the country. So Spain's kind of, weakening at this point. Now, the funny part was that Philip II, and going back to Bloody Mary, this gal here, they were married. And when Henry VIII died, Bloody Mary became successor to the throne of England, and Philip II was in Spain ruling, so they were kind of making a little bit of a monopoly on the Catholicism front in Western Europe. Problem with that was Bloody Mary didn't make it. She died, and Philip II thought he was just going to get Spain and England under his crown, but she didn't leave the crown of England to him. She actually left it to her sister Elizabeth. So Philip II was like, all right, another sister. So he thought he was going to just automatically marry Elizabeth. But Elizabeth was, she wanted to secure her power, her sole power to herself, and she knew that if she got married to a man, that it wasn't guaranteed that she would be respected as a ruler. So she became known as the Virgin Queen because she was never married. That doesn't mean that she was actually a virgin, but that's for another time, another place. We'll talk about that. So Philip II and Elizabeth I went to war. And Philip II was so confident in his Catholic backing from God that he thought he was going to crush Elizabeth I. But that's not what happened. And the story goes was that there was a Protestant wind that came through and helped Elizabeth I get to victory. Elizabeth I actually hired pirates who were called privateers, anybody she could that could go out and destroy Philip II's armada, which was his fleet of ships, which is what Spain was known for at the time. Elizabeth I made a rally call to many of the soldiers and in her crew, and she said, "I might not be a lion, but I'm a lion's cub, and I have a lion's heart." And what she means by that was, I'm not a dude, I'm not a man, but I still have the power that you would think a man could hold as a ruler, and I'm going to rule to the best of my ability and be successful like you would imagine or want from your ruler. So she did. She won the war against Philip II. She was tolerant within her own country of England. England had gone through her father, who made everybody Protestant with the Act of Supremacy, which allowed him and guaranteed him the right to force people into their own, a specific religion. Then his daughter, Bloody Mary, made everybody Catholic again. So now here's Elizabeth, and instead of forcing all of England to become a particular religion again, she said, you know what, we're just going to be tolerant here. I would prefer you to be Protestant, but if you want to be Catholic, that's cool too. And so she talked about religious toleration. She was a patron of the arts. She defeated the Spanish, but in order to secure herself as Queen of England, she also executed her cousin, just to make sure that there was no other person that could take away her power through her family's name. So although you might see her as, oh wow, look at her, she's supporting the arts, she also killed her husband. So she's just as ruthless as any other absolute monarch out there. On to France. So one of the absolute monarchs that we spoke about last year was Louis XIV. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about Louis XVI. They're not the same person. They are different. Louis XIV actually was super lucky that he was king during the time that he was. Because unfortunately for Louis XVI, he is not going to live during a time where absolute monarchs were accepted. As I said to you earlier in this broadcast here, you got absolute monarchs, you got limited monarchs, and you also have enlightened despots. Enlightened despots were rulers who gave certain limitations to freedoms. So maybe they would allow for freedom of speech, or maybe they allowed for religious toleration. Louis XIV was neither, and he was actually so self-centered that he had his face plastered all over his palace. He called himself the Sun King. He basically told everybody that I'm the state, I am the center of your universe, and if you tell me otherwise, then I don't need you in my world. And he could just basically torture and kill you if he wanted to. He forced many people to be Catholic, although there were certain Protestants in France. They were known as Huguenots. His claim to fame, though, is, besides his wild style there that you can see in that picture, he spent lots of money just on, parties and building the Palace of Versailles, which is seen on the slide there. Palace of Versailles, it's iconic in history for the many meetings that happened there over time, which you're going to see as we get through history. But by building the Palace of Versailles, he actually bankrupts France, and for the next couple of kings of France, they're going to struggle with their status in the economic zone, which we'll get to in the next couple of weeks. Here we got a couple of fighters. We got an Austrian ruler named Maria Theresa, and then we have Frederick the Great, who came from Prussia. So in the map here, Frederick the Great is from Prussia, over here, and Maria Theresa is from Austria. Now, you got to understand, if you kind of pull back and zoom out and you look at Europe, you're going to know that certain groups were Catholic, certain groups were Protestant. Whether you're Lutheran, Anglican, what have you, being a Protestant meant that you were against the Catholic Church. And in the Holy Roman Empire, which is outlined in this red here, there was a whole mixing going on there. So for a certain number of years, it was called the 30 Wars year, people were just fighting each other. Protestants versus Catholics, Catholics versus Protestants, Protestants versus Protestants, Catholics versus Catholics. It got so confusing and so crazy. And it was over a religious issue. Now, the other piece of this was that Maria Theresa and Frederick the Great also fought. And it was mostly because Frederick the Great saw Maria Theresa as vulnerable, as weak, because she was a woman, she inherited the throne from her father, and he thought that he had an opportunity to take over her land. And in the end, that isn't what happened. She I guess gets the win for this one, but in war, who really wins, right? They're both actually seen to a certain extent enlightened despots because he allowed for some freedom of speech, and she forced nobles and clergy to pay taxes, which wasn't the case in a lot of countries. Mostly lower class people were the only ones paying taxes in other areas. Joseph II is Maria Theresa's son. As you saw, she had many, many kids. He was one of them. He's going to be the inheritor to the Austrian Empire. And he also was known as enlightened despot for that list there of wonderful things. Peter the Great. Tall dude. Very tall. He inherits the throne at a younger age, too. He was to the point, very intelligent. He wanted to make Russia westernized. Also, that's basically modernized, making it look like Western Europe. And he had the authority to force people to do that. He made them shave their beards if they couldn't pay a tax. He brought scholars and teachers over to live in Russia to modernize it. He forced particular clothing on you. He changed the looks of cities, the architecture, to make it look like Europe. So he was successful in modernizing. What he wasn't successful at was gaining a warm water port, which Catherine the Great was. And the funny thing is that Catherine the Great wasn't even from Russia. She came from Germany. And the story goes that, it's a long story, but I'm just going to tell you quick. It was believed that she killed her husband somehow to gain the throne. Whether or not that's true, it's up to you. What's also not true is that she had a love for horses. She liked, horses, but not in that way. So what you have to remember, though, for her was that she gained the warm water port. She took the Black Sea from the Ottoman Turks. Very successful there. And she participated in the Enlightenment, but in my educated opinion, I don't know if that was because she felt like it was the right thing to do, or if it was because she just wanted to secure her power as queen, and she didn't want the people to revolt against her. So she gave them certain rights that kind of stifled the revolution, which a lot of monarchs were starting to do because they saw what the English people had done to their king during the Glorious Revolution. Suleiman the Magnificent. Yes, I know you might not think he's Europe, but you got to remember the Ottoman Empire did comprise somewhat of some of Europe there. So he was also considered a absolute monarch. The Ottoman Empire preserved a lot of learning when the Dark Ages had occurred. So he was one of the people present during their golden age, and he helped to have art flourish, gunpowder. Again, he was one of the kings or emperors of the Ottoman Empire that was known as the Gunpowder Empires. Just to review, the other two were Safavid and Mughals, which is right here. You got Akbar the Great. Akbar the Great was known for his tolerance. It was tough, though, because the Mughal Empire had Hindus, had Buddhists, had Muslims, had Sikhs. So there was a lot of different groups living there. Now, what is the global impact of these absolute monarchs? Well, we got fighting. We got heads getting chopped off. We got economic impacts. And that economic system that was present was known as mercantilism, or mercantilism. And that's when the mother country is trying to export more than they import. So that was a quick, super quick review of many of the absolute monarchs present. There's a quick couple of slides on enlightenment. I don't have time for them though. So toodles.